Imagine sending your child off to summer camp, excited, nervous, carrying bug spray and a sleeping bag. Then one day, you get a call. They never came back from a simple canoe hike. And for over 30 years, there's nothing. No bodies, no answers, no clues. Until 2024, when a ranger discovers a strange sight in a remote swamp, 16 canoes, tied tightly together, in perfect silence. This isn't just a story about missing kids. This is about how they were lost, and why no one ever told the truth. Nestled deep in the wooded hills of upstate Michigan, Camp Echo Pine had been a summer staple for over 2 decades. By 1991, it had earned a reputation as one of the safest, most serene camps in the region, a place where parents felt comfortable sending their children to disconnect from the modern world. There were no televisions, no electronics, no distractions, just old wooden cabins, pine-scented air, fire pits under starry skies, and a shimmering lake that served as both playground and teacher. That year marked the camp's 24th season. The staff were experienced, the counselors enthusiastic, and the campers, mostly kids from nearby towns and suburbs, were thrilled to be there. Among the various activities offered, canoeing was a favorite. It was seen as peaceful, low risk, and good for team building. Parents were told the routes were well planned, always supervised, and never strayed far from the shore. On the morning of the 19th of July, 16 campers, boys and girls between the ages of 10 and 13, set out on what was meant to be a half-day canoe excursion. It wasn't unusual. These trips were scheduled every other day. That Friday, the group was led by 2 counselors, one of whom had recently joined the camp that summer. Their route would take them into the nearby marshlands, a tangle of winding waterways that eventually opened up to a clearing known as Deer Hollow. The group was supposed to paddle there, eat lunch, take photos, then return by early afternoon. The canoes were packed with water, sandwiches, first aid kits, and walkie-talkies. The counselors signed out their radio call-ins, and by 9:17 a.m., the group pushed off from the dock, their laughter echoing across the lake as the paddles dipped in rhythm. But they never came back. By 3:30 p.m., the first stirrings of concern rippled through camp. Counselors radioed repeatedly with no answer. By 5 o'clock, a search party was dispatched. By 7 o'clock, the camp director was on the phone with the sheriff's office. And by midnight, the surrounding marshes were crawling with rescue teams, rangers, and volunteers with flashlights and dogs. Nothing. No overturned canoes, no clothing caught on branches, no paddles floating downstream, no signs of a struggle, no signal flares, no shouts, no movement in the water. It was as if the entire group had vanished at once, silently, without a trace, like the lake had simply swallowed them whole and refused to give them back. By the second morning, when not a single canoe or child had turned up, the local sheriff made the call that no one wanted to make the case was beyond local resources. The FBI arrived on site within hours. What began as a search and rescue quickly escalated into a full-scale investigation. Helicopters buzzed over the marshlands, using infrared sensors to detect body heat. Drones, still relatively new technology in 1991, were deployed with high-powered cameras to scan the thick canopy of trees that line the waterways. Search dogs picked up faint trails near the lake's edge, wet sand, disturbed reeds, but all the scents ended at the shoreline, as if the group had stepped off the earth and into thin air. Then came the first strange clue, a walkie-talkie discovered by a volunteer about 300 yards off the marked trail, lying in a patch of dry moss beneath a tree. It was one of the 2 radios issued to the counselors that morning, the one registered to Daniel Price. Oddly, the device was still switched on, faint static crackling through the speaker. It had scratches along the casing, as if it had been dropped or scraped, but it was bone dry, untouched by the previous night's heavy rain. This detail stuck with investigators. If the radio had been left outside since the disappearance, why wasn't it soaked? Why wasn't it buried in mud like everything else in the marsh? Had someone placed it there later? Over the following 3 weeks, divers scoured the riverbeds and slow-moving streams inch by inch. They searched the reeds, the deeper channels, and even parts of the nearby lake that were rarely used. Still, no signs of a crash, no upturned boats, no life jackets, no debris, and worst of all, no bodies. The camp shut down activities indefinitely. The press descended on Echo Pine, turning the rustic cabins into a media circus. Parents demanded answers. Volunteers worked around the clock. But the investigation had hit a wall. Then in mid-August, nearly a month after the disappearance, the second unsettling clue was uncovered: a map found at the back of a filing cabinet in the camp's storage shed. On it was a hand-drawn route, a winding path veering sharply off the main canoe trail into an unmonitored section of the marsh. The path was marked in faint pencil with one word beside it: Hidden Bend. The map was signed with the initials DP, Daniel Price, one of the counselors who had gone missing with the group. That discovery triggered alarms. The camp director admitted Daniel had been a last-minute hire, brought on just 2 weeks before the summer session. He had shown up with glowing enthusiasm and what seemed like good instincts, but no one had checked his background closely. And now, his employment file raised red flags. No verified references, a post office box instead of a home address, and a phone number that was later traced to a disconnected payphone in northern Ohio. Was he hiding something? Running from something? Or worse, had he led those children somewhere they were never meant to go? Theories swirled, but nothing stuck. There was no criminal history, no ransom demands, no claims of responsibility, and with no bodies and no suspects, there could be no charges. Eventually, the press moved on. The volunteers went home. The parents were left with grief and silence. In early 1992, the FBI formally reclassified the case. Presumed deceased. Cause undetermined. Camp Echo Pine was closed permanently. Its cabins were left to rot, its trails overgrown by weeds and moss. It became a ghost of its former self, the setting of one of the most haunting mass disappearances in Michigan history. And for more than 3 decades, no one would speak the name Daniel Price aloud, not because they forgot, but because they couldn't bear to remember. For decades, the disappearance at Camp Echo Pine was one of those stories passed around in hushed tones, a local legend soaked in grief. Most believed the truth would never be known. The trail had long gone cold. Time, nature, and silence had buried whatever answers the forest might have once held. But in April of 2024, everything changed. Alan Mercer, a 59-year-old forestry contractor with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, was conducting a routine environmental impact survey in a rarely accessed part of the Huron National Forest, about 40 miles southeast of the original campsite. The area was thick with undergrowth, dotted with shallow bogs, and considered nearly impassable. Alan had done this work for years. He wasn't easily spooked. But as he was logging tree growth data near a ridge of cedar, he noticed something odd, a near-perfect line of snapped saplings leading away from the path. It looked like something wide and heavy had once been dragged through the underbrush. The trees weren't chopped or cut. They had been bent, broken, and left to decay in place, forming a path barely visible unless you knew how to see it. Alan followed it out of curiosity, his boots sinking into the soft earth as he pushed through waist-high cattails. What he found was not on any map. Nestled in the heart of the marshland, obscured by brush and silence, was a small, stagnant pond, water black with tannins, undisturbed for what looked like years. It had no inlet or outlet, no trails leading in, no human footprints. And just beyond the reeds, caught in a shaft of weak afternoon light, Alan saw something that stopped him cold. A group of canoes, 16 of them, green, aluminum, the kind used in youth camps during the late 1980s and early 1990s. Their paint was dulled with age, and moss crept up the sides. But they weren't scattered or overturned. They were arranged, all tied together at the bow in a tight ring, like a ritual or a signal. The ropes had frayed from decades of exposure but still held firm, looping each vessel to the next. The water was too shallow for the canoes to have drifted there randomly. Someone had placed them deliberately and then left them to be forgotten. Alan called it in immediately. Within 24 hours, the FBI was back. For the first time in 32 years, teams cordoned off the area. Drones were deployed. Forensic divers entered the pond. Their descent stirred layers of mud and algae untouched for decades. What they found chilled everyone involved. There were no human remains, no bones, no clothing. But in the sixth canoe, tucked beneath the center seat, was a sealed plastic bag, yellowed and brittle with age. Inside was a water-damaged notebook, warped from time but still partially legible. The cover was faded, but the name, written in blue pen, was just clear enough to read. Aaron Walsh, Cabin 3B. The notebook, though water-damaged and brittle, was still readable in sections, a quiet, heartbreaking time capsule from a child who had vanished over 3 decades earlier. The handwriting was uneven, sometimes bubbly, sometimes shaky. The name on the inside cover, written in careful cursive, read, Aaron Walsh, Cabin 3B, property of me. Don't read unless you're me. Aaron had been just 13 years old, and her journal offered the first real window into what might have happened in those final hours. The earliest entries were innocent, almost joyful. She wrote about campfire songs, ghost stories, her crush on a boy from Cabin 2, and how she hated the oatmeal at breakfast. There were doodles of canoes, frogs, and inside jokes with cabin mates. She mentioned her counselor, Daniel, the new one with the sunburn and weird boots, as being quiet but nice. But then, everything shifted. Starting on the 18th of July, the tone changed. The entry that day was short but unsettling. We're taking the secret trail. Daniel says we'll see a hidden island. He says the camp doesn't want us to know about it, but we trust him. That line stopped investigators cold. The hidden island had never appeared in any official camp maps or training manuals. No staff had reported it. No such detour had ever been sanctioned. The next entry was timestamped, the 18th of July, 6:40 p.m., and it was longer, scrawled faster, as if Aaron had written it in a rush. We paddled so far today, we didn't even see land anymore. Everything looked the same, water and trees. The air smelled weird. Daniel was quiet the whole time, kept checking over his shoulder like someone was following us. He kept saying we were close. We all joked about pirates and secret treasure, but I think he was scared. He told us not to turn back. That was the last full page. But beneath it, at the bottom of the page, written in tiny, shaky letters, as if done by flashlight or in haste, was one final note. We heard something in the fog. Like a boat? A motor, maybe? It was getting louder. Daniel looked panicked. He told us to split up and paddle toward the trees. He said he'd be right back. That was hours ago. He hasn't come back. There were no more words after that. Just a single line drawn across the page, hard, shaky, as if the pencil had slipped in fear or frustration. Investigators studying the notebook were stunned. It confirmed what no one had dared suggest for decades. The group had gone far off course, not by accident, but on purpose. And it was Daniel Price who led them there. But the most chilling part wasn't the suggestion of danger. It was Erin's tone. She never wrote like she was in danger. She didn't panic. She trusted him. Until he vanished into the fog and left them alone in the silence. With the discovery of the canoes and Erin's notebook, the long-dormant investigation was reignited. But as investigators re-examined every detail, one uncomfortable conclusion began to surface. Daniel Price may have led the children off course on purpose. It was the theory no one wanted to believe back in 1991, not without hard evidence. But now, the clues pointed in one direction. Daniel had taken those kids into uncharted territory, and he'd done it knowingly. The problem was motive. There was no history of violence, no documented instability. His background, thin as it was, included no criminal record, no troubling behavior, no connections to any extremist group or cult. He had grown up in Indiana, bounced around jobs, and had applied to Camp Echo Pine late in the hiring season. On paper, he was unremarkable. That's what made it worse. If Daniel had been a known threat, someone would have noticed. But instead, he slipped in under the radar, earned the kids' trust, and vanished with them, leaving only riddles behind. So what happened out there? Some officials believe it was a planned disappearance, and that Daniel had some vision of taking the group into the wilderness, maybe to start over or prove something. Others argue it was a misguided shortcut gone horribly wrong, that he misjudged the route and got lost. then panicked and left the kids to find help, but never made it back. There's no evidence for either theory. No final radio message, no known destination, just silence. A retired FBI agent who had worked the original case in 1991 and returned to consult in 2024, put it in simple but chilling terms. It's as if someone took those kids and made the world forget them. And then there's the detail no one can explain, the canoes. 16 of them, cleanly tied together in a closed ring, floating in black water for 3 decades. Why? Why were they tied together? Some forensic experts believe the children may have done it themselves, a survival strategy. If they were stranded, cold, or afraid, they may have tethered the canoes to avoid drifting apart. It would have kept them visible. It would have kept them together. Others think it was something more symbolic, not strategy, but intention. A signal, a statement, a message to anyone still looking. That ring of canoes, weathered but intact, may have been the children's way of saying, "We're still here, we're together. Please find us." Or perhaps it was the final act of one remaining child, the last one left, tying the others together so no one would be alone. To this day, no one knows. And that unanswered question, the image of 16 empty canoes floating in silence, still haunts everyone who has seen them. The story of the Echo Pine 16 is not one of closure, not in the way families pray for or investigators hope for. No bodies were recovered, no arrests were made, no final words, no forensic breakthrough, no confession. But something was found, something that mattered. For 33 long years, the parents, siblings, and friends of those missing children lived in a suspended kind of grief. Too much uncertainty for mourning, too much silence for hope. Birthdays passed, anniversaries came and went. Some families moved away to escape the pain. Others never left, afraid that moving on meant letting go. But then the canoes appeared, not wrecked, not sunken, but floating, waiting. That discovery didn't answer every question. It didn't bring back the 16 lives that vanished in the fog of that marsh in 1991. But it did something else. It proved they were real. That the children hadn't just evaporated into myth. That the forest hadn't completely swallowed their story. That somewhere, in the quiet corners of the woods, something had remained. A silent reminder that they were here. That they mattered. That they had tried to stay together, to survive, to be found. And maybe that's what those canoes were. A final message. A quiet echo from the past. 16 empty vessels. Still floating, still tied together, as if they were holding hands through the darkness. No answers. But finally, after decades, a trace. And sometimes, that's all that's left.